Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State, brought to you once again by On Fire Ministries and the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story. And the news behind the news is not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ, and about not ending in prayer, moving to action. It's also about the gospel of the kingdom, Zechariah 2:5, but I declare the Lord will be a wall of fire to her on all sides, and I will be the glory in her midst. Here is the encouraging word for today. God knew what was going to happen before the beginning of time, and he chose to place you and me here in this moment in time. And all of the evil is being exposed for one reason: for a reckoning. And that reckoning is coming very soon. And there is going to be a day where some crisis happens here in the United States, and the walls of your church, this church, every church, are going to be filled with people standing against them. They're going to be in church, maybe for the first time in their lives. I want you to imagine your church right now, standing room only. Are you prepared to receive all those people? And more importantly, to introduce them to Jesus Christ. That's the time that we're in. Things can change in a moment. I mean, we saw this over the weekend with the Russian coup, and I'm going to get to that here in a second and tell you what I believe is really going on, because we, real time here at Patriot Radio, gave you the updates as they were happening so you could battle track and follow what was going on from many different sources, some competing. But ultimately, we were putting out information faster than the news media. And I'm going to tell you how you can be a part of that in the future if another event like that comes up, because it's certainly going to, and how you can be informed at a moment's notice and how that can help you and your family. But the encouraging word here is that where these wars are happening, there's also great revival, particularly in Eastern Europe right now. Also revival happening here in the United States of America. We're going to look back at this period of time, and we're going to understand that we actually live in a time of revival, and that people for the first time are coming forward and saying, hey, something's really messed up. I want to know the truth. And we could be there to receive them. We're seeing baptisms happening en masse, and there's plenty of events coming up, and I'm going to talk about those as well, where Christians, if we unite under the one banner that we should all be united under, Jesus Christ, come together, we will see a transformation like has never been seen in history. Now, what does this mean to you? How is this encouraging to you? Because you're standing, the enemy is running scared right now, and they're getting sloppy, and they're getting exposed. And I'm not just talking about Hunter Biden. I'm talking about the real evil behind the scenes that is controlling people like Hunter Biden. But yeah, the evil's exposed, but that doesn't really mean anything unless replacement, transformation happens so that it will never happen again. That's where you and I come in. And there are going to be opportunities. In fact, there already are opportunities happening right now, from school boards to just the transformation of mindset in your community that we can all affect and we can all influence. And God made you and I for exactly that, for exactly this moment. So we walk in victory. And that brings us to our good versus evil segment right now. But first, if you're online and you're watching, take a moment. Please take a moment. At one point during my time in the legislature, we were reaching 250,000 people until Facebook tried to throttle us and censor us. So the way to get around this is on your favorite social media platform. Take a moment right now, just make a comment. Hey, love it. Or, hey, I'd like to hear you talk more about this. And then share it with your friends and family. So take a moment and do that right now. We're going to go to our good versus evil segment, and the global warming hoax, the climate hoax, which is, it's always been about control, is getting kind of ludicrous right now because now they're coming after your pizza. Roll the cue.
Idiots who run this city are doing everything in their power to destroy it. We have naked men with their bouncing around all over the city yesterday, in public, in front of children. We have the most violent, raging crime rate ever. We are being invaded by illegal immigrants who are being treated way better than our homeless veterans, our teachers, and first responder heroes who were fired, still not compensated because they didn't take the Fauci injection. Our city schools produce the dumbest kids, and the woke punks who run New York City are afraid of pizza. The world used to respect New Yorkers as tough, thick-skinned, and gritty. Now we have become fied. It's a shame. You heard of the Boston Tea Party? This is the New York Pizza Party. Give us pizza or give us death. Give us pizza or give us death.
So for you listening online, he's throwing pizza toward the city council.
Give us pizza or give us death. New York City is nothing without pizza.
New York City, indeed, is nothing without pizza. But if you thought all was lost, we all know that when we were younger, we would answer the question, what do I want to do when I grow up? Here is the quite hilarious woke answer to some kids that understand.
I want to work for a woke company, like super woke.
When I grow up,
I want to be hired based on what I look like
rather than my skills. I want to be judged
by my political beliefs.
I want to get promoted based on my chromosomes. When I grow up,
I want to be offended
by my coworkers
and walk around the office
on eggshells
and have my words policed
by HR. Words like
grandfather,
peanut gallery,
long time no see,
no can do.
When I grow up,
I want to be obsessed with emotional safety and do workplace sensitivity training all day long. When I grow up, I want to climb the corporate ladder
just by following the crowd.
I want to be a conformist. I want to weaponize my pronouns. What are pronouns?
That is one of the funniest things I've seen in a long, long time. That is a group of kids who understand the future, understand where they're at, and understand that the solution is not wokeness. The solution is awakening through Jesus Christ. I love it. All right, now for your daily intelligence briefing on the international front. Coming to us first from China. On Twitter, Trent Talenko. Well, interesting. Finally, it is confirmed Chinese-made 152 millimeter Type 66 HE shells used by a Russian artillery unit. So clearly China is, in fact, supplying Russia with ammunition. Now, we knew this, but now it's proof. Anatoly Golitsyn, who is probably the most important defector, and I have been mentioning his name on virtually every radio show that we've been doing for the last 4 weeks. He was one of the most important defectors because he was part of the strategic planning committee for the KGB. And as a result, Anatoly Golitsyn laid out 148 predictions, and 139 of those predictions have now come true. Well, they weren't predictions in the sense of he was prophesying something. They were predictions in the sense of, here's what we laid out strategically. This is what you can expect to happen. One of those things was the fake, and I want to walk through this with you, but I'm going to mention this part first. The fake idea that China and Russia were somehow apart. And the West, by their actions through NATO, has somehow brought them together. That is a lie. And unfortunately, it is a great disservice to us on the conservative side to keep parroting that narrative that somehow we could have stopped China and Russia from coming together. Well, Anatoly Golitsyn talked about this that was actually a strategic decision made by the Russians and the Chinese, the Soviets and the Chinese, to make it look like to the West that they were split when they actually were not. Now, the real story is that in 1919, at the first Comintern, they made the decision to come together, and they have been together, working behind the scenes together, helping each other behind the scenes and clandestinely together since that time. So for over 100 years. I think if we want to talk more about this, a friend of mine sent me this the other day, and I just want to go through it very quickly because it's an absolutely fantastic analysis of China and in Russia and this combination today, what they're doing. So, first of all, we could, and we can know this, I think, from virtually every Soviet defector that has come. Let me list them for you if you want to go. Yuri Bezmenov, General Mihai Pachipa, Anatoly Golitsyn, Pavel Sudoplatov, even more than that, the Venona transcripts, Vasily Matroikin in the Matroikin archives. We know these things as a matter of fact. These are primary source documents that have been cited. So with that said, consider this, that the 1960 Sino-Soviet split was a deception to have the U.S. embrace China, and they suffered thousands of deaths in border conflicts to make it look real to the United States. They're all about sacrificing people to make it look real to the United States. And that the Soviet and Chinese Communist parties have been joined at the hip since the 1919 Comintern was created in Moscow. In 1991, the Soviet Union didn't so much collapse as it reorganized as part of a strategic deception to lull the West to sleep and roll back the tremendous Cold War pressure that Reagan was placing on them. Now, we talked about this because Anatoly Golitsyn put that in his works. So, if that's the case, then in light of that long-range strategic deception, what happened over the weekend? I'm going to get to that here in a second. But more on China. And everybody needs to be paying attention to this. Taiwan is now becoming more boisterous, loud against China, and that they will attack China. A Taiwanese official said today, and this was yesterday actually, or actually it was this morning, Tuesday, that Taiwan will strike back against any aircraft or entities of China's PLA that enter its airspace or waters and fail to heed its warnings. Open source intelligence continues. Speaking to reporters, Joint Operations Planning Office Director Major General Lin Wen said that Taiwan will strike back in self-defense to safeguard the security of Taiwan's airspace and territorial waters. And the warning comes after China's H-6K bomber, which is armed with air-launched hypersonic missiles, began conducting round-the-clock encirclement of the island. Next, coming to us from OSINT Defender, the Taiwanese Ministry of Defense is reporting that 2 frigates from the Russian Pacific Fleet, so this is the Russians working with the Chinese again, were detected earlier today in the Taiwanese defense zone off its eastern coast. They responded by ordering the deployment of aircraft and naval ship in the direction of the frigates while placing shore-based anti-ship batteries on alert, with ships eventually exiting the area. So again, the Russians now are probing as well, working in concentration with the Chinese. Meanwhile, and sir, if we could pull this map up, the Chinese own 380,000 acres of land in the United States, including land near an Air Force base in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Coming to us from Indo-Pac News. Here's that Chinese control the land to gain access to U.S.-based information through Chinese firms. Well, of course they're eavesdropping if they own the land there, or at least they're trying to develop it so they can have that. So here's the map. If you notice, and I want everybody in the Spokane area and also down in the Yakima area to pay attention to this map. Chinese-owned farmland is in Spokane County, Washington, and Chinese-owned farmland is down near Yakima, Washington. So take a look at this map, and then also down near Klickitat. Now, the sheriff down in Klickitat, if somebody can make sure to share this Patriot Radio episode with the fantastic sheriff down there, Bob Songer. Share this episode with him. There is Chinese-owned farmland in Klickitat County. Take a look at that. Now, you'll notice that they haven't been so brave as to necessarily go into Montana, but there is definitely some Chinese-owned land in Idaho that has been of controversy. And so there's questions about whether that truly is owned or it's an economic zone there, whatever. The point is that the Chinese are trying to buy up agriculture here in the United States of America and are trying also to make it not that big a deal so people turn a blind eye to it until the time comes that they actually will use it. Now, I want to paint a picture for you so that you all understand something. China and Asian mindset as far as warfare is concerned, they fight to their logistics instead of having their logistics necessarily tail behind them, although they've started to pick that up because of Western military tactics. In Asian mindset for warfare, the idea is to move forward to your logistics, so you fight toward your logistics. So if you see the Chinese buying a farmland, they're fighting literally toward their food. And you can see what they're targeting: California, the West Coast, parts of the Southwest, very clearly and very specifically. All right. That moves us to the Middle East. Coming to us from Debka File, Egypt's President El-Sisi seriously challenged by Army Chief General Askar. So this is interesting that they're having infighting in Egypt. Now, Egypt is known as one of the countries, the only country actually, that flipped sides during the Cold War, went from Soviet to United States, and it appears it might be on a trajectory to flip back. In addition to that, we also learned today that Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted an offer to go visit China. So now not only do we have Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the rest of these Middle Eastern countries going to visit China, but we now have Israel. Again, it's a direct reflection of it's not leadership. There isn't leadership in Washington, D.C. It's morally bankrupt, morally corrupt. And all it's really doing is serving to undermine the United States. Our credibility everywhere. Our allies are fleeing because they don't trust that the United States is going to be there. Now, I'm going to jump back to China for a second. There's a great article by Ann Magazine. China is a dying paper dragon. I want to read the last part of it. It's an article by Chet Nagel. Fantastic analysis. He has a bunch of graphs and stuff in there. You can take the time to read that. But this is the bottom line conclusion. The connections between China's demographics, geography, and economy are becoming obvious. No workers, no products, not even dishwashers and refrigerators, let alone an army, a navy, jet aircraft, satellites, and rockets to establish bases on the moon. No imports of food and energy for any one of several likely reasons. Immediate famine and economic collapse. Demographics don't lie. China is a dying paper dragon. But do not cheer over that, because as a result, that will cause massive economic repercussions throughout the world. Chinese debt is now 279.9%. I want you to hear that again. Chinese debt is now 279.9% of GDP, and the growth of private credit in China beggars belief, making ludicrous any notion the yuan could ever challenge the dollar as a global reserve currency. I completely and 100% agree with that analysis. There are too many dollars out there right now for the U.S. reserve status to really even be in jeopardy. I want to cite one other. We actually have this on Twitter somewhere. There is a picture of the raid that the Spetsnaz did on the Wagner PMC headquarters, where they showed piles of cash. Does anybody want to guess what Wagner and Russia are using as the currency to do all of their cash transactions in? In the millions of dollars, you guessed it, the United States dollar. And there's pictures of it from this raid that happened. And Prigozhin admitted that he had money in cash there, but the cash was US dollars. I love it. It's funny. So, number 2, we're going to go next to Ann Magazine. Sam Faddis, the lackey by Blinken, visits China and covers for his boss, Xi Jinping. This is a fascinating analysis. Again, a lot of primary sources in here, and Sam Faddis has been right on so many things. The Chinese could stop fentanyl shipments anytime they wish. They know that. Blinken knows that. We all know that. But lackeys don't confront their masters with the truth. Lackeys bow and scrape and do what they are told. Blinken went to China. Nothing has changed. The slaughter will continue. The fentanyl crisis is an intentional, through proxies and the cartels in Mexico, an intentional attack on the United States to destabilize and weaken the United States prior to a world war. That moves us next to Russia, coming to us from OSINT Defender. The Russian Federal Security Service confirmed that criminal charges against Yevgeny Prigozhin and the fighters within the Wagner PMC group, which participated in the armed rebellion on June 23rd and 24th, have been completely dropped. Hey, I want to talk about something here quickly. What happened? What actually happened there? And this is what it looks like. Okay, there are kind of two main options. Not saying that there aren't other, it's just two main options. So Prigozhin, as a leader, seems to be well loved by his men. There is no question on either side that Wagner private military contractors, so these are mercenaries that Putin admitted he funded and created and essentially made Yevgeny Prigozhin a oligarch. So this is a creation of Putin, the supposed former KGB. He's still KGB. The guys that control the Russians, former Soviet Union, are KGB. They always have been. They repainted themselves. He starts Wagner, funding it, creates Prigozhin as an oligarch, and they become the most effective fighting force in the Russia-Ukraine war right now. Now, I would argue that there are some special forces that are in Ukraine that have done an absolutely fantastic job as well, and arguably could be an equal or better fighting force. But both sides respect and recognize Wagner as the great and the best fighting force the Russians have. So as a result of that, Putin realized that they were gaining too much power. And Prigozhin's many videos that he was putting out there clearly showed in the background that men were needlessly dying because of the incompetence of the Russian Defense Ministry, the Ministry of Defense, the MOD. Now, I have talked about this literally for a year and a half, the incompetence of the Russian fighting forces historically, their failure of organization, their failure of logistics. These are objective facts. No true analyst really disputes this, and especially anyone that has actually done the research on Russian tactics, Russian strategy, and not only analyzed them, but experienced them in various war zones. Okay? So, that said, it's very clear that the Ministry of Defense is widely known as incompetent. So, Prigozhin saying that doesn't really surprise any of the analysts, or even the Russian mill bloggers for that matter. So, it rings true with the Russian people. And as a result of that, many people respected Prigozhin. And when Putin wanted to dismantle Wagner, Prigozhin turned, again, this is option one, Prigozhin turned. They actually did attack his forces with aircraft and helicopters, and then decided to march on Moscow because they had no other choice. That's option one. Option two is this is a long-range strategic deception to make it look like Wagner really isn't a part of the Russians and controlled by them, but he actually still is. Now, this is where everything comes together. Regardless, they did march north. Regardless, there is geo-confirmed information. They marched north, geo-confirmed information that they arrived in Rostov-Don that also they arrived in Voronezh, and that they did seize or at least stop from any kind of effect the military bases along the way that were Russian military bases. Now, there is a nuclear storage facility in Voronezh, and by Prigozhin's own tweets and messages, actually, they were on Telegram, retweeted on Twitter. He said that they had seized all government facilities in the Voronezh region. Well, if that's the case, does he have nuclear weapons? That's the first question we should all agree on that we need to be asking. Does he have nuclear weapons? Now, if he has nuclear weapons in option one, and he was truly a rogue actor, and now he is in Belarus, he is in Belarus with control of his own nuclear weapons. Right on the doorstep of Poland. Option two, he's still under the control of Putin. He is 200 kilometers from Kyiv in Belarus, and he's also on the doorstep of Poland. And it could be a cover for so-called rogue elements to detonate a nuclear weapon in Europe or even in the United States. So in either event, the question is, where are the nukes? And that is what we need to be keeping our eye on. Strategic deception or a true Russian coup? Who has nuclear weapons? Will they be used? That is what we should all be caring about. And that is what we should all be analyzing. That moves us now to the National Front, coming to us from the Press of Atlantic City. Pleasantville Church vandalized for second time this month. We are also seeing it in Spokane. There has been a gigantic rise in anti-Christian hate here in Spokane. We have seen it through graffiti, through the desecrated Bible that I talked about on Patriot Radio a while back, and then also strange incidents in various churches as well that seem to be incidents where people are probing the churches to see what their security is or their level of security for a future attack. So this is pre-attack surveillance, potentially, and we are all right now raising our vigilance levels because it looks like, especially with the regime in Washington, D.C., that they're trying to declare open season, the entire left, on Christians in America. This brings us to the Gateway Pundit. President Donald Trump said this, quote, "This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state," end quote. President Trump throws down the gauntlet in a historic New Hampshire speech. Pretty good summing that up, actually. Pretty good summing that up. So the question for us then is, what do we do next? Do we sit back or do we stand up and fight? Because I agree with many of my patriots, the patriot community, and in the church, that our best days are actually ahead. And where there is great darkness, there is also great light, and we want to be that light. And that brings us to the last thing, and that is the regional front and the upcoming events with Shaun Foyt. July 28th in Olympia, Washington, Kingdom to the Capital tour at 6 p.m. We are going to have some parking with shuttles that we will put out later. But mark your calendars, tell your churches, spread the message far and wide. July 28th, 6 o'clock, right downtown Olympia. We are expecting 20,000 people there. Be part of the historic event where Washington is transformed for Jesus Christ, and we bring the kingdom to one of the darkest capitals in the country. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been just praying for us. Thank you to everybody that was at the event this last week with Shaun Foyt. He did get his guitar back. That was a miracle testimony in and of itself. People's past was used by God to redeem that guitar. Just a wonderful testimony of God's grace and his mercy. Now, before we bring our guest on, we need to talk about something that is super encouraging. This is still the era of miracles, and it depends on whether we want to be open to miracles actually happening. In other words, God working through each one of us so that miracles happen in a person's life, go ahead and roll the clip.
Get back to doing what he needs to do. In Jesus' name.
Thank you guys. Man, feels good.
Do you feel pain?
Not as much, honestly. I mean, warmer.
Feels warmer.
Yeah.
Warmth is a sign of the heat.
It wasn't this warm a minute ago. Oh, that's weird. Wow.
That's God.
You're really catching me, man.
I
mean, it literally feels warmer than almost a few degrees before you touch it. Wow.
Last thing I'll ask you to do, my friend, if you can just stand and put a little pressure on me.
Man, now you're going to test me. Man, it just feels so much warmer than it did a little while ago.
The only thing I need is to show love.
That is so cool. It's
Jesus Christ.
God, it really got warm.
Man, amazing. 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 A man healed right there, right on camera, right on video. Didn't even expect it. We just need to be out there praying and doing God's work. Again, take the time right now to follow, comment, and share Patriot Radio with all your friends and family, but also do something really important. Go to Rumble, because we're trying to get away from YouTube. Go to Rumble and subscribe to our Rumble channel. It is right up there on the screen. Sawyer is going to put it in the links below online as well. And make sure that you hit that subscribe button. That brings us now to our guest, Shaun Frederickson. Shaun is a culture influencer who has been exposing the hidden agendas of darkness by brightly shining the light of truth. He's the founder of Freedom Revival, a movement which calls the church to rise, restore, and reclaim the culture for the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Shaun, it's great to finally have you on Patriot Radio. God bless you, my friend, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. What a joy to be on here.
Well, let's talk about this. I mean, man, darkness is being exposed every day. This has been just the last week. Jim Caviezel coming out. I mean, some of the darkest stuff in the whole world, at least for me, makes you turn your stomach turn, and it just makes you sick to your stomach. What are you seeing out there right now? But more importantly, how is God flipping the script and shining the light into these really dark places?
Well, I see this as an opportunity for the church. You know, there's been a long time of comfort and the ability to sit stagnantly and not really do anything. And now that there's legislation that's being passed to encourage the state to remove Christians' children, then the church can't really sit quietly anymore. It's very similar to like Tyndale or Bunyan or even Polycarp, where they're forced to do something. And that for me is encouraging, because apathy destroys the church. And it's engagement where we have the testimonies. We see the Lord get to move. Like that clip you just showed of that person praying for that healing. The man praying stepped into discomfort, and through his obedience to the gospel, he was able to witness a transformation. And I believe there are more Christians that are getting activated to realize they're a part of this story. They are necessary for the kingdom to come to earth. Like we have a role in this. We can't just sit and expect somebody else to do the transformation in our communities anymore.
I agree 100%. And, you know, with that, let's give a little bit of context. How did you get involved in all of this? Share with the listeners a little bit of your testimony and how you came to be a culture influencer. And I would like the label, if I could, culture transformer, because that's ultimately what we want to see.
Amen. You know, so it started for me, I guess I've got to go back to high school and college, where I was always kind of afraid to get attention. I would be that kid in high school and college that sit at the back of the class, that was not hungry to get the teacher to call on me. And July 2021, a year and a half into the lockdowns here in California, I had spent so much time researching the lockdowns and understanding that this is unconstitutional, that this has never happened in the United States. And it was so much information that I accumulated that once it came time for me to speak, I went to a county board of supervisor. I sat in the audience, not anticipating to say anything, but I had someone encourage me to open my mouth. And it was the accumulation of information that led to me speaking with knowledge. And when I spoke, a video went viral of me sharing about 2 minutes of the lies coming from the county, which helped me grow a social media influence of, a couple thousand people. And then I leveraged that to encourage more people to speak. And then we created the Freedom Revival in January of 2022, making a statement to say that 2022 is not going to be the same as 2021. and that the church is going to get activated. We have a role, and trying to remind the church that we can no longer be silent in the face of evil.
We can't. And it's been the church being silent. I mean, if Christians just showed up, I'm not even talking necessarily do anything. If we showed up, things just change. Absolutely.
There are cities in Southern California like Chino Hills and Temecula and El Cajon where churches have decided, you know what? I have a duty to speak against evil. And it's amazing. The school boards, the city councils, the mayor becomes conservative and becomes Christian. And it's just because the church said, you know what, I'm going to speak about righteousness. I'm going to speak about the evil that's taking place. And people respond. They're just waiting for courageous pastors to speak up.
We've seen courageous pastors, when they take the lead like that. But I want to go a little bit deeper. It's not just pastors who are going to be praying for people. It's not just, it wasn't pastors that showed up when you were there. You weren't ordained or whatever. I mean, you just showed up because God told you to show up there. And that's what I want people to catch, that vision of, hey, you can make a difference. It doesn't have to be just a pastor praying for somebody or a pastor showing up. You can actually show up and God can move through you as well.
Amen. That looking at the American Revolution, that's what really took place. Like, think of, man, gosh, I want to say Jonas Clark, but he's a pastor. I was thinking of Sam Whitmore,
Sam Whitmore,
guy he took his rifle out and he stood against the redcoats when they're coming down the street. It's those kind of people that realized I've got a job, I've got a duty as an American citizen, and I'm a Christian, and it's my duty to stand against evil as a Christian. That's just what Christians have always done. And why would that change now? As there's like this comfort, there's this recognition that maybe somebody else will do it for me. And I think that what we're attempting to do is challenge that status quo. Like, we've got more to do than just make money and live a comfortable life.
With the generation. So I'm a little bit older than you are, obviously, but the Jacob generation, as we like to call it here at On Fire Ministries, is, really consumed with how many likes they got on social media. And that really doesn't matter unless the gospel of Jesus Christ is being preached, right? So if you could talk to the next generation about this idea of using everything that God has given them for the kingdom instead of for their own self-gratification.
Oh, man. I think the temptation to make this about yourself is really easy to fall into. It's a snare that you see politicians fall into regularly, where they get to become the hero of the story. And in pastors, we see the same thing happen with pastors. But what's really been incredible the past couple of years is finding a Christian body here in Southern California where we simply love the opportunity to see the church rise up to the occasion, because we realize it's not one person that is going to change a community or to influence a city or to influence a county. It's a number of people working together that are going to empower each other as well as share the success. Just like the greatest soccer teams, the greatest football teams. You look at the New England Patriots, from a few years back. They were incredible, not because of one person. It wasn't Tom Brady, but it was a conglomerate of people willing to share the workload, and they all celebrated each other. The greatest football teams are typically the ones with the most humble players willing to share the success. And I believe that as the church, we can learn from that as we do a lot of hard work and we thank the people next to us, and we're willing to get our hands dirty and not make it all about ourselves. I've got, some people that follow me on Instagram, and what does that really mean? If my community isn't becoming more righteous, let's say you have a big following of 100, 200, 300,000 people on social media. What does that actually transpire to? What value does that actually produce? And I find myself meeting with a lot of pastors and meeting with local people in the city, and I find my worth in that, where I walk away from that relationship and I get to hear stories of a pastor just recently who he told me today that he went out and said something more courageous, more bold, that put him kind of at odds with the the progressive movement. And it gave me some encouragement to know that I'm positively influencing somebody else to be more courageous. And, we could do that on social media, but I think what's really necessary is doing that face to face with people. And you're not going to get some kind of like pat on the back or some trophy or award or some gratification from it. You just know that you're building up something that'll last a lot longer than some Instagram profile.
Yeah, amen. And with the personal relationship part that you just talked about, I mean, that really trumps everything. And that's what Paul did. I mean, he had to travel around and build those relationships face to face. It wasn't something that could necessarily be done through social media. And I think there's this little disconnect, or the creation of a chasm between people when we just stay on social media. And that's really the only touch that we have.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's fraudulent, really. Like social media, you get to show the best of yourself. And, and then you can buy followers, you can buy likes. It's really, I see it kind of as counterproductive. I try to use it to build the momentum for myself, to get people to come to events and to show people what it looks like. There's a lack of discipleship in the United States, where there are not as many Christian men that are encouraging younger Christian men to follow in their footsteps, like live like me as I follow Christ. Like
from tyranny, from our own
got some audio there.
Yeah, I don't know where that audio is coming from. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
All right. No, I think that what we need is more people setting examples. And to set that example, you don't necessarily need to be in your 40s or 50s or 60s. You just need to hear God's voice and follow God's voice. And then be bold enough to pull people along with you to say, read the Bible together and try to emulate Christ. It's a pretty simple formula. Like a lot of the disciples were much younger than we think. There's a possibility they could have been in their late teens or maybe early teens. And those men stood boldly on the word that they knew to be true. And they influenced and changed their surroundings. And most of them became martyrs. And I think, honestly, as Christians, we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Where if you're chasing likes on social media, or if you're trying to build some massive account so people can make you feel special, like that in itself is counterproductive to what the gospel is. Like the gospel is humble. The gospel is continually giving glory to God. And when you're building some social media platform to build glory for yourself, I don't know how God fits into that picture.
We were just talking about this earlier today, about it taking 3 generations to establish something. It takes an Abraham generation, an Isaac generation, and a Jacob generation. It takes all of them. You can't just have one or the other. It takes them all. And then a Jacob generation really brings the energy, and it brings the fire and the strength into it. And the Isaac generation brings some wisdom and some strategy from the Lord into it. And the Abraham generation really brings in wisdom and really a sense of peace and covering. And when we start to see one kind of overlap, for example, the Abraham generation, like holding on to the reins of power until the very last moment of breath, instead of handing it to the next generation, the Jacob generation and the Isaac generation, it really creates a perversion. Or we see the Jacob generation not stepping up or thinking that they're just going to immediately become pastors or something like that, instead of just walking in the calling that God has for them and accepting mentorship. I mean, it really needs kind of both. And I love your comment about discipleship, because really that's the follow-up. We have great events. So many. We had 7,000 people here at the Shaun event in downtown Spokane, right? But then what happens, right? It's kind of what happens next, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because people keep asking the question of, what do I do? I've heard pastors ask this question in their resistance to Marxism, socialism, communism. What do I do? Like, I know how to preach the gospel, which is powerful and it's necessary. And I've heard pastors say, keep the main thing the main thing. And they try to avoid politics and they try to avoid any social issues. But if pastors don't know what to do, how in the world could we expect those people inside the church to know what to do? And so we really need more leaders stepping up saying, I know what the voice of the Lord is, and I'm willing to plow that field. If you come with me, we can do this together and create a strategy, and it doesn't have to be complex. It can be quite simple, like just showing up to the school board, showing up to the city council, managing and observing what these evil people are doing and just telling people about it. It's not difficult, but it does take time and commitment. And, with this microwave generation where you have to have everything now, sometimes that commitment can be difficult.
It really can. And, I think it just is incumbent on every single Christian to start walking in this instead of just talking about it, right? And I think that's where you're going. And I would like to just talk a little bit about American history. I mean, this isn't the first, and Christian history for that matter. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, right? I mean, George Whitefield traveling around the colonies, John Morant gets hit, slain in the Holy Spirit, which just wrecks a whole bunch of people because you have somebody who's a 5-point Calvinist pointing at somebody going, prepare to meet your God, and he falls out in the Spirit, for 30 minutes. I love this kind of stuff that shatters, the traditional boundaries. We have a history of it ebbing and flowing like this, so it's not some dire circumstance. This is the ebb and flow right now, and right now as it kind of flows in the downward valley, this is exactly the time to stand up. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I love the way you say that, because it's hopeful. There are so many people, including myself, where I can get caught in these fear cycles thinking, oh my God, we're going to be overcome by the evil, and then the United States of America is going to be no more. We're going to be like communist China.
That is enough.
But really, it's recognizing.
Do I lead you in a way that is well with your soul?
Yeah, we got audio coming back in. I don't know where that's coming from. All right, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
We got ads coming over the top.
It's weird.
It's really understanding, thinking of Polycarp. I mentioned him earlier, and Polycarp had hope. It's recognizing that we go into the darkness and we pay attention and we realize we have an audience behind us. So we go in with hope, just like Polycarp going to the stake. And when they light the blaze on fire, he's worshiping, he's glorifying the Lord. And the audience witnesses a man that is defying reality, and they come to Christ because he was hopeful and he was bold. It's not about us. It's about the people paying attention to when we glorify God, and God gets the glory, and there will be revival when Christians stand up boldly against evil, not because we necessarily like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they go into the furnace, but think about who's watching it. Like, they go in and they say, like, if it happens, like, if we die, we shall always stand for Christ, right? Like, for the gospel, for the Lord. But think about the people that were turning up the furnace. Like, what do you know that they came to the Lord after that? Because he's never seen something. And I feel like that's what Christian perspective is missing, is we're preaching the gospel, but we're failing to live it out. And I fully believe that once Christians start standing up against evil, the LGBT, alphabet soup, evil, communism, that when we begin stepping up against it boldly, courageously, with hope, then that's where the transformation and revival will come from, is us pushing into it, not attempting to be the heroes ourselves, but allowing the Lord to work through us for the people that are watching.
Shaun Frederickson, and I love the website. I wish we would have thought of this before, freedomrevivalevents.org. If you could talk a little bit about the site and kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, so Freedom Revival is focused in San Diego and Southern California, where we have been bringing pastors from around the region, hosting large events, and trying to show the local community what it looks like for courageous pastors to speak up. We had our first one in January 2022. We had our second one in October of 2022, the same weekend that Halloween was taking place. There happened to be an event that same day, which was called, it was a drag queen story hour, where they were drawing children into a bar, a 21 and older bar. And we stood up for the gospel. They stood up for evil. And it was wonderful being able to show people this is what the church does. Like, we stand for like, we are the salt of the earth. We are the light on the hill. And Freedom Revival Events is really focused around empowering the church to once again get activated in civics, where we believe that free people will rise together.
I love it. And let's talk about historically. So back at Jesus's time, they had the temple to Diana, they had a temple of Artemis. I mean, all of these, pagan temples that were actually tied directly to the government. They had temple prostitutes trying to disrupt events and all of these kind of things that were happening at that time. And it was persevering Christians who saw the hope that transformed that culture. And if you go to those places in Turkey, go to those places in Greece, to this day, they're rubble because the transforming power of Jesus Christ turned those places into free governments, republics, and all of those oracles of Delphi and everything else were no longer needed because Jesus was king. I love that idea. And we can be in that place again today.
Yeah, that's so good. Yes, 100%. All it takes is courageous people. You know, like think about the disciples and how courageous they were. And courage is a byproduct of faith. If you look at all the people through COVID and the lockdowns, those who chose not to speak up for the gospel just had a little bit of faith. And those who were courageous during that time were just showing how faithful they were to the gospel. And I believe that now more than ever is an opportunity to show your faith and your courage that you have for Christ. And the fruit of it, my God, the harvest is plentiful, but we just need more workers.
That's a prayer. We should be praying for, not the harvest is here. We should be praying for, just as Jesus instructed us, workers for the harvest field. I love that.
Amen.
So, Shaun, just in the last couple minutes that we have left, you have really taken this to a practical level. So it's not just up in theory or some esoteric thing. The practical level, what can people do in their community right now to be transformation agents for the kingdom?
That's so great. I would say step one is have a conversation with your pastor, whether your youth leader or your lead pastor, associate pastor. Have a conversation and see where they stand. If they're not preaching about the necessity for the church to get engaged within civics in your city or in your county, then have a conversation and see where they're at and encourage them. There's fantastic books out there that we can offer. Live Not by Lies by Rob Dreyer is a great resource. If you want to use an older one, you have The Law written by Frederick Bastiat. You have Thomas Paine, Common Sense. These are great books that would help a Christian realize their responsibility. And these are American books, right? Well, I mean, Bastiat is French. I would say first have a conversation within your church, because local is most important. The presidential election, as much as the news talks about it, is really irrelevant, because the most power that we have is the local magistrate. And so the next step would be see what's going on in your local school board, city council. If you could maybe start attending those meetings, that'd be great, because then you can find out what's happening in your local school board, find out what they're teaching, if they're introducing doctrine, which is likely. Many school boards around the country are introducing this trans doctrine or the diversity, equity, inclusion doctrine, which is all masked in communism, this idea of removing the gospel, removing God, and introducing government or science as the system that we worship. So if your school board is introducing that, you need to speak up against it. Say something. Just go and say, I oppose this. It's really not difficult. If you want to get more poetic about it, you can find someone who's spoken, just print off their speech and read that. Like it's just an opposition. You need to voice your opposition. Eric Metaxas, in the book Letter to the American Church, another good book to reference to your pastor, he discusses about the spiral of silence, that if we choose to be silent once, then we'll choose to be silent again. And then you create this momentum against speaking, and you have to break that chain. You need to speak. So I recommend a school board, usually low pressure, and then the city council. Find out if your city council is biblical. Like, see if they have biblical principles. Are they going to protect your rights? That's their duty, is to protect your rights as a citizen in that city. Go and confirm to make sure they're doing that. If they're not, speak, and then welcome people to come speak with you. You can be a hero if you're willing to be courageous. It's that simple. Everyone is looking for a hero, but we are the heroes waiting to be created in our local government. And then I would also encourage you, it's 2023. If you don't have a good school board, if you don't have a good city council, I would say now is a great opportunity for you as a Christian to think about running for office. Think about running for that district. If you've got a good superintendent or maybe a good mayor, like think about maybe having a conversation with them, see if they would endorse you. If not, then run for that position. There is a need of moral and righteous people to get engaged in civics. And if we think that a secular humanist is going to do that, we are mad. That is not going to happen, because morality is derived from biblical principles. I would say that's the easy action steps. Conversation with your pastor and leaders in your church. School board, go and find out what they're doing. City council, go and find out what they're doing. And the next step would be the county board of supervisors, the county legislators, see what's going on at that level. Those are the most important elements for the church to get engaged in. If you go to the state level, that's important as well. But if your house is not in order, then it really doesn't matter what's going on out there.
Amen. Shaun, I just want to tell you that when you brought up Frederick Bastiat, that was fantastic. Every candidate who wanted my support when I was in the legislature for 12 years had to read the law if they wanted my support. So I made it kind of a key to go in, and I think that should spread throughout the country. So I love it. God bless you, Shaun. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. We're praying for you. Love to connect with you when I'm down in San Diego in September. God bless you and keep up the fight.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you in person.
All right. Shaun Frederickson, freedomrevivalevents.org, freedomrevivalevents.org down in San Diego, taking the fight to the darkest places in California and winning because he's bringing the light of the kingdom there. I love it. And again, a very positive spin on this, but it's not a spin. It's a positive mindset. And we need to embrace that. This isn't the first time that this stuff has happened. People have faced this throughout history. So let's stand and let's move forward. And if you have not read Eric Metaxas' book, Letter to the American Church, I strongly urge you to do that. That's from the preparedness segment tonight and this moment of standing. Read that book. It is absolutely incredible. If you just want a summary, we actually have summaries, but you have to attend on Sunday. Pull me aside and ask me about it right here at On Fire Ministries. Also, in the You Are the Plan segment tonight, Berkey filters. If you don't know what a Berkey water filter is, they're fantastic, and they can filter gallons of water at a time. So check out Berkey water filters as a practical preparedness thing. Last but not least, the event coming up on the 28th of July with Shaun Foyt, Kingdom to the Capital Tour coming to Olympia, Washington. We want to have 20,000+ people there. We are expecting 20,000+ people there. And make sure you like, comment on this show, and share it with your friends and family. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. God bless all of you. And he is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. Keep up the fight.